human evolution, and climate change. Our story begins approximately 4.4 million years ago, just as the Earth's climate began to undergo a major change. Since then, climate has driven environmental changes that are responsible for change to bipedalism, bigger brain size, adaptations in behaviour, and migration events between the continents. Famous fossil localities in South Africa and in the East African Rift Valley provide us with the first evidence of the genus hominid from which the anatomically modern human evolved. Some of the earliest hominid groups identified are Ardipithecus and Australopithecus. These groups are thought to be some of the earliest hominid species. They were the most ape-like of the hominin lineage, using a combination of bipedality and tree climbing, living in a cool, humid woodland environment.
The habitat and climate in which these species evolved changed drastically. This led to the decline of rich woodland and the replacement by savanna grassland.
Orbital forcing was at the root of this global climate change. Prior to 2.8 million years ago, climate varied with a periodicity of 19 to 23,000 year cycles. At this time, precession of the equinoxes, or the tilt of the northern hemisphere relative to the sun, dictated variability of the African climate. After 2.8 million years ago, the primary periodicity of climate variation extended to 41,000 years. This came about as the result of obliquity cycles, the tilt of the rotational axis of the Earth relative to vertical. As a consequence of this, ice sheets at the poles grew large enough to allow sustained oscillation between glacial and interglacial periods. Then, approximately 1 million years ago, periodicity shifted to longer and larger cycles of 100,000 years. Eccentricity cycles represent variation in the shape of the Earth's orbit around the Sun, from nearly circular to elliptical. By altering the distance to the Sun, eccentricity cycles have a major impact on the Earth's seasonality. This manifested in the tropics of Africa as an oscillation between periods of high monsoonal rainfall and drought, identified through analysis of marine sediments. Long term, this all resulted in a shift towards a cooler, drier, more seasonally contrasted climate in the late Pliocene.
The change in the African climate is reflected in vegetation. Deep-sea sedimentary organic matter was analysed to determine ratios of carbon-4 and carbon-3 in plants. While C3 is found in plants adapted to human conditions, C4 is an indicator of arid adapted plants. An increase in plants composing C4 was recorded, particularly during periods of glaciation, when decreased insolation limited evaporation at the equator and subsequent precipitation at the tropics. Studies on stable isotopes within pedogenic carbonates from the tropics of Africa indicate replacement of woodlands by open savanna grasslands between 3 million and 1 million years ago, while analysis of pollen spectra demonstrates the emergence of cooler and drier vegetation types such as shrubs, heath and grasses around the same time.
Fluctuations in climate affect local animals as well as vegetation. Animal evolution and changes in behaviour such as herding were also induced by these environmental changes. As per natural selection, only the adaptable species survived.
Hominin brain size began to increase rapidly around 780,000 years ago, sparked by two environmental and behavioural scenarios. Firstly, hominids would have adapted to the short-term variations, a constantly changing environment. This led to the selection of alleles which promoted advanced cognitive mechanisms such as memory. Secondly, marked cooling and drying are thought to have affected brain size. Hominids adapted to the predictable effects of a drop in temperature, such as building shelter to protect themselves from the elements. The high-protein diet adopted by hominids was essential to the development of the advanced brain of the group Homo.
Homo habilis and Homo erectus were the first members of the genus Homo, living between 2.4 million years and 120,000 years ago. They are thought to have lived in a predominantly grassy environment with the African climate getting cooler and drier.
A difference in brain size of Homo habilis and Homo erectus can be seen here. Increased brain power was critical to the survival and success of the Homo group, allowing for advances in cooking, using fire, and in obtaining food using tools. Evidence dated around 1.8 million years ago from Dmanisi, Georgia, established that Homo erectus was one of the first Homo species found outside of Africa, at this time walking fully erect. The earliest fossils of Homo sapiens can be found in Ethiopia, dating to around 200,000 years. From here, the Homo species spread and colonized most of Europe and Asia. The influence of climate change on the migration of hominins out of Africa is significant. The shift in climate and the subsequent migration of animals to preferred habitat led members of the Homo group out of Africa, expanding their behaviours and adapting to new environmental stresses. Homo heidelbergensis lived between 700 and 200,000 years ago. Following expansion out of Africa, this species was among the first to live in colder climates. Their bodies became more compact, giving them a short and stockier body type. This adaptation was most likely to reduce skin surface area and conserve heat.
Homo neanderthals lived between 200,000 and 40,000 years ago. These are our closest extinct relatives. Neanderthals had smaller and stockier bodies in comparison to us, but their brains were slightly larger in size. This species lived in a range of environments across Europe and also thought to have lived through many different climatic changes. It is unclear how they were able to do this or if these climatic shifts led to their extinction, but recent studies suggest that the Homo neanderthals may not have been all that different from today's anatomically modern human. Homo sapiens evolved 200,000 years ago. Early anatomically modern humans were adapted to a warmer, tropical climate, but around 40,000 years ago, humans occupied a range of environments covering Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, sea level dropped by nearly 100 metres, and the anatomically modern humans travelled to America.
Over the past 4.5 million years, climate has driven environmental changes that are responsible for the changes seen in hominin species, such as bigger brain size, adaptations in behaviour, and migration events between the continents. The climate of subtropical Africa during the Pliocene and Pleistocene underwent significant change paced by the Earth's own orbital variability. Along with this climate fluctuation came speciation and adaptation pressures of flora and fauna. These factors essentially led to the migration of hominins out of Africa to adapt and inhabit different environments and ecological landscapes. This influenced the growth and evolution of the hominin and resulted in the anatomically modern human seen today.